in giving something life is a really powerful feeling, right? And I need that feeling like every day, or I feel like shit. So, I'm a manic doodler. Like I have faculty meetings, and like I'm running the faculty meetings, and I'm doodling during the faculty meeting. So that's how we roll there in White River Junction. So in figuring out how to work with vets, I took all of, kind of turned the lens inward. And then I also found inspiration in other places. This is a book, I don't know if anyone's familiar with, that I found really inspiring, Match de Catch. And the matches are actually collaborations between artists in residence at a state-run home for mentally handicapped adults. And the artists engaged with people that were working, the artists engaged with the people at the home, not as tutors or not as like experts, but as true collaborators. And the project was initiated by a group of cartoonists who are associated with a Franco-Belgian publishing house called Frmuk. And it's just spelled capital F-R-M-K, no vowels in there. And they came through White River Junction a few years ago. There was a video about their experience. And it was super excited. So, armed with this, my own little inner monitoring, and really jazzed about this project, I reached out to the VA, and one of the great things about Vermont is that 7 degrees of separation or whatever it is. In Vermont, it's like 1, Everybody knows everybody in a way, and it just so happened when Lanier Summerall, the chief of mental health and behavioral sciences at the VA, who actually just got a job at Charleston running that VA, so she's moving, but she happened to be in my wife's book group. And when the book group was hosted at my house, usually I kind of take the kids out and shuttle and just kind of tiptoe around. But I talked with Lanier, and she invited me to come to visit the VA, where she'd kind of gather up a group of vets and maybe some counselors, and I could talk about some of the ideas I had. So that's what I did. I met with about a half a dozen vets from 3 different wards over some pizzas. And they were all intrigued and very encouraging, and they liked the ideas of sharing their stories and working with cartoonists. And we decided the next step would be for them, I was on their turf at the VA, and the next step would be for them to come down, like a mile down the street, and come to the Center for Cartoon Studies, and I would kind of show them around. And I left feeling really encouraged, like this is going to be great. I'm really jazzed. They were so polite and nice. And at the risk of rambling, the other thing that really I noticed, like at the cartoon school, graduate art students, like you bring in some pizzas, and it's like, it's like gone, and then everything's like left and napkins, and it's like, all right, they're in their own head. But the vets were just like, somebody opened the pizzas and somebody put out the cups, and they all sat and they waited to take a second slice, and then they cleaned it up, and I was like, wow, this is really a different culture here. So anyway, that's a observation, either here or there. But I was jazzed. Good manners gets me excited. What can I tell you? So I was all set for this meeting, but this meeting never happened. All right. Vets had trouble getting rides. There are all kinds of challenges, in a rural state. Cell phone numbers stopped working. Emails were just never returned. One of the counselors that was there, he just told me that a lot of the vets just wouldn't be comfortable meeting in a place they were not familiar with, and if they weren't sure other vets were going to be there, they might not come. So that was okay, now I'm back, now what? Back to square one. So there were clearly challenges that in these men and women's lives that I just didn't understand and did not appreciate. So I knew that if something was going to happen, at least for now, it needed to happen under the auspices of the VA. I guess I needed a captive audience. So at this point, I was introduced to, Lanier introduced me to the national, in White River Junction is a national center for PTSD research, and I was able to connect with the then director, Matthew Friedman, who's since retired. It's funny, everybody that I've kind of worked with there is either leaving or retired. I'm sure I had nothing to do with that, but anyway. And I met with Dr. Paula Shore, the deputy executive director, and now she's the executive director. And this was like a PTSD varsity team. I think I read somewhere that Dr. Friedman, I think he coined the phrase PTSD, or somebody attributed that. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. So when I booked, I had a meeting, and all of them came out, and very busy, important people. And this is the nice thing. When I walk in, I'm like, I'm a cartoonist, and I want to help out. whatever, but I'm the director of the Center for Cartoon Studies, and they've heard about, there's the local paper, they have to write about something, so they've written about us, and there I go, we'll hear what this guy has to say. So I sat down with them, and they handed me a comic. And the comic that they showed me was was this one, Coming Home, What to Expect and How to Deal when you return from combat. I wish somebody copyrighted that little line. It's hard to say. But anyway, and I was informed, they told me that this comic was very effective in helping vets find resources they needed, and it's already been done. Thank you very much, and it was nice of you to stop by. And so I explained that my intention wasn't to make a comic like Coming Home, but rather to use comics as a way to engage with veterans or maybe collaborate with veterans. And when I was asked how to do that, I held up that book, and I started to articulate, and I started rambling. I'm rambling a little right now, and I have these notes. So you can imagine I don't have notes. I just kind of started spiraling out a little bit. And I suddenly realized that I was a little bit in over my head, and there was this vast chasm between what my instincts told me, which was, this is worth doing, this is really a good idea, and then my basic ability to articulate any semblance of a plan. They were talking Coming Home, and I was talking this, and it's like two different almost languages, even though they're both comics. And I wasn't as interested in this straightforward comics as information delivery system, which is what Coming Home was. And I'm glad that exists. It's a great thing to have. But I was talking something that I couldn't quite articulate. So I knew I was onto something, and I didn't want to squander any more of their time. So I said, listen, give me a couple months. Let me think about this. And if you could give me a morning of your time. Come to cartoon school from 9 to 12, and let me workshop a workshop for you, and maybe that will better show you, and put you through the paces, and I can get your input. And maybe they agreed to do that. And I started working with some alumni and some CCS faculty, and we put together a workshop. And I know a lot of what I was figuring out was Art Therapy 101, but because I had to learn it for myself, but I also knew that even though some of the stuff I was figuring out had been, is basic stuff, I also knew that comics brought its own unique strengths to the mix. And I've seen this firsthand. I've done workshops literally, all over the world, at-risk youth to homeless children, Ivy League schools, Muslim and Sunni women in Bahrain, high schools in the South Bronx. And I've always found that people have this universal positive association with comics. There was a reason that everybody asked me, do something for kids, because kids love comics. Everybody in their youth love comics. And it seems obvious to state this, but that is its great strength, and it's one of its great strengths as a medium for teaching, because people grew up having this really strong reaction to things like Calvin and Hobbes, or obsessively collected superhero comics, and now go to the movies with their kids, or they have Dilbert things tacked to their cubicles, and that's what kind of gets them through the day. My 11, then when my daughter, was in her 10, 11, she was obsessed with Archie for years, mesmerized it, because it was what she thought was this glimpse into this exciting lives of teenagers. I'm sure 11-year-old boys found other aspects of Archie to get excited about. But anyway, comics kind of work on this Patch Adams principle, except it's better, because clowns are creepy, But anyway, that was a cheap shot at Patch Adams. I'm sorry. Comics are a very straightforward and expressive medium. There's no bullshit involved. There's little pretense. It puts people at ease. The cartoonist Chris Ware has a good line that if somebody walks into an art gallery or a museum and they don't understand the work on the wall, they kind of think they're stupid. But if they read a comic and they don't get it, they think the cartoonist is stupid. With comics, there's an understanding that you don't need a master's in art history to understand what you're looking at, and there's also an assumption that a good cartoon is expected to communicate something clearly. In that sense, it's less about drawing than it is about graphic design. And this is a really important distinction to make because I always run into people. I'm looking at you, Warren. Where are you? That say, I can't draw. But it's not drawing, right? It's different. It's like pictures that you read. And when you call it drawing, and maybe it's just a nomenclature thing, but when you call it drawing, it just creates anxiety. I can't draw. People stop drawing at a certain age. Those kids, wow, ninjas, cowboys, they're all into it. And the older you get, the more anxiety that people bring to it. So you don't want to also have workshops where you're creating anxiety as opposed to relieving them. So when Matt and Paul and company came back 2 months later, the first exercise we did was presented as an icebreaker, which I'll do a variation of in a workshop. And I'm doing a workshop tomorrow, so I'll do a variation of that. And I've done it with fourth graders. I did it with West Point cadets, business groups. And I call it an icebreaker, but it really, it's just a way, again, I use words that, you call it an icebreaker, no one kind of takes it seriously. But what I do is I divide everybody into groups, into little teams. And each team are given 3 cards for this exercise that have different prompts. And so it's randomly generated. So the purple cards have like a state of mind or emotion, perhaps. And then there's a profession, and I just did this randomly too, and then an animal. And they have to create a comic from this. And before picking up a pen, teams have, I give them like 6 to 10 minutes to discuss and strategize how to best draw their comics. They act things out, they discuss props and shapes, they ask questions, like, how do you distinguish a dragon from a dinosaur, right? It's like, well, when a dragon opens its mouth, fire might come out, right? That might be one way. Or, you just hear all these very interesting solutions. How do you show exhausted from merely tired? Because comics is a language. And that's something that I've been thinking about in some of the conversations I've had with people, like this talk of aesthetics and like how important that is in a way. And also in clarity, it's like, you wouldn't read through a book whose fonts are really, really ugly, right? It'd be hard to read. And same thing with the surface of comics. There has to be some clarity there. And this is an exercise in kind of, like visual literacy 101 in a sense. So after discussion, I take out my smartphone and I set the timer for 2 minutes. And everybody has a sheet of paper and a pen, and they have to draw this character in 2 minutes on a sheet of paper. And what's great about the timer, it's like, everyone just has to do it. You dive in. The pain only lasts for 2 minutes. And when the timer goes off, like the first response is like always laughter. The time constraint means that everything's going to look wonky or comical. Like the person who prides themselves on drawing the best, their drawing doesn't look any better than others. In fact, sometimes what they consider best is a lot of cross-hatching and shading, and they can't do that in 2 minutes, right? So it kind of evens the playing field a little bit. And also another thing is like the aspects of the drawings that are wrong or off, or often its greatest strengths. That's what makes something funny. And this also like it forces people to hit these marks. And the difference between a doodle and a comic is that the comic has to hit its marks. In this case, the mark is exhausted gym teacher dragon. So after the students draw their thing, we look at it. The laughter dies down a little bit. Then we talk about how to clarify, like what's working in one and not in the other, what's confusing. People learn more just by looking how other people solved it. And then after this conversation, I take out my phone again, and as Peter Arno would say, we go back to the drawing board, and they redraw their characters. And always the second version is always better than the first. And it's funny that a lot of times they don't think that the second drawing is better than the first, because the first one was more fun. The second one's doing it over, right? But the second drawing is almost always better. Working in teams, having specific marks to hit, having a limited time to complete the exercise makes it feel like a game of Pictionary or a game show. And the introduction introduces some key aspects of cartooning. Most importantly, that cartooning are images that need to be read, and this idea of information hierarchy. You only have 2 minutes to put it down, so you can't do all your fancy cross-hatching and draw every scale on that dragon. You have to prioritize visual information, put down the most crucial information first, and not get lost in the weeds. So having done this exercise both with vets and cadets, the teamwork aspect is something when I work with military folks, like that they respond to really strongly. And listening in on a group's discussion of how to draw an exhausted gym teacher dragon, you'd think they were like discussing the logistics of breaking down camp, or putting together some heavy artillery or something. And I also like this exercise because it deals with revision. I think Bob Mankoff has an adage about in comics, it's not the think, it's the ink. You really have to think through things first. And it was interesting, a little bit of an aside as well, that when I was at West Point, somebody came up, we did this exercise, and they talked about kind of doing your draft is really good in leadership. And when I think of the word leadership, I think of decisiveness and confidence and, bravery and courage. And they're like, well, leadership, like you have to lead somewhere, right? And like that first draft or that reflective part of the process of making comics allows you to know where you're going to go, where you're going to bring all these resources. Because every cartoonist in here knows that if you don't have to draw that busy fairground with the Ferris wheel, like once you draw that, it's a pain in the ass. It hurts to have to not put it in your comic, right? But if you do your thumbnails and drafts first, you figure out where you need to go, and you're a better outfit and more efficient as a result. All right, so we did this as an icebreaker. The next exercise we did at the workshop, I will introduce by way of a quote from my friend, the cartoonist Hilary Price, who does the syndicated comic strip Rhymes with Orange. Making comics is a daily exercise and acknowledging my anxieties and putting them to work for me. I think about that phrase that humor is making light of something. Taken one way, it means to make light of dark things. To me, humor is the nightlight in anxiety's dark corners. That's a great quote, because comics, of course, are associated with humor, and humor has a detoxifying effect. So in preparing for the workshops with vets, I came across several articles that listed things people shouldn't say to vets. Thank you for your service, but I don't think we should have been there in the first place. Things like that. So even if the intent is well-meaning, these comments and questions can trigger strong emotional responses. So in this exercise, I paired some of these comments with uncaptioned gag comics. And then they came up with things that people say, and then we matched captions to the comics.